Hello, everyone. Nina Marnie. Thank you for coming out this evening. Lovely summer's evening here in Adelaide, Tantania. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are gathered here today on the lands, by the waters and under the skies of the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and to extend that respect and that acknowledgement to any First Nations people who might be joining us here today. My name's Susan Luckman, and it's my great joy and pleasure to be the director of the Creative People Products and Places Research Centre. That's a mouthful. We call it CP3 for short. And today's event is a collaboration with the Jean Monnet Centre of Excellence here at the University of South Australia that's funded by EU Jean Monnet funding. And I have the great joy too of being the platform leader for creative industries of that. So this brings my two favourite things and favourite groups of colleagues here at UniSA together. And it's my great joy that Sebastian Olmos joined us all the way from Europe. He's very grateful to be here. A more formal welcome and acknowledgement will be given by Justin shortly, an introduction to Seb. But I just want to thank you for getting on that aircraft and coming all that way, because it is a large way to come. He wants to thank us for the sunshine, the general thawing out that has occurred since you've arrived and the morning swims. So I'm glad we're able to offer something in return, because it is quite an investment of time and energy, so thank you. Tonight's discussion, as you can see, is not important at all and doesn't really touch upon anything significant. What can we expect from the end of the world? One of my colleagues walked in just before and said, I didn't know there'd be alcohol here. It still came. And of course, I think it is only reasonable that we can expect that we have food and some conviviality and something to sort of take the edge off the discussion of the end of the world. But I look forward to hearing what Justin O'Connor, my colleague, and Seb Olma have to offer about this today. So I just need to say a few bits of housekeeping. Please feel free to continue to fill your plates. We accidentally inherited 2 lots of catering tonight. So we haven't deliberately over-catered, we've just inherited fresh food. Don't worry, it wasn't lying around anywhere. There was a double booking, so please do feel free to eat your fill. We'll stop, the formal proceedings will stop about, I think it was 6:15 was mentioned to me roughly, but we welcome people to stay back. Sorry, 7:15, I'm losing track of time. But we encourage people to stay back if you wish and continue to the discussions and the conviviality and the meeting of people while you're here. For those of you who may wish to find out more about CP3 and what we do and any potential future events that we might have, because we do have them periodically, we have a website on the UniSA website. Just look for CP3 at UniSA and you'll get there. And we have a newsletter and email list you can subscribe to. I'm pretty much just going to leave it there. I wanted to say, if there is a siren, I meant to sort of say things like this. If you hear an evacuation alarm, please move in an orderly direction towards the stairs, as you instinctively probably will anyway, where they are straight back where you came from. I was in a situation the other day, we were having a meeting at one of the hotels in town, not this kind of meeting, just a completely alcohol-free meeting. And somebody asked, what should we do in the case of fire? We need to make an announcement. And the staff member said, the lifts are over there. Do not do this. Please avoid the lifts. So without going on any further, because I'm probably starting to ramble at this point, it's my great honour and privilege to introduce my colleague, Justin O'Connor, Professor of Cultural Economy here at University of South Australia.
Thanks, Susan, for that. Good introduction. See if this is picking me up. It's a bit like that Doctor Who episode, the end of the world, you know, where they all have drinks and watch the world and through the window. So, yes. So, yeah, tonight's it's a bit of an experiment tonight because Seb and I are going to do our little bits. We're going to interleave them if we can do that. Kind of like 2 stand-up comics maybe. So we'll see how that goes. And it's experimental in that way, but it's also experimental in what we are trying to say, because Seb Olmer, he's now at the Avans School in the Netherlands, in Breda, in the south of the Netherlands. And we've worked together for quite some time on different things, and different projects. And we really wanted to see if we could meld our presentations together, meld our ideas together. So some of it might work, some of it might not work, but as they say in the business school, let's fail forward, you know. So failing forward, here we go. So what can we expect from the end of the world? Well, this is, of course, a kind of a reworking of a title of this film, which is a great Romanian film. And I'm going to play it because it gives a sense of what a world ending might look like.
Vă prezint o producție de Hollywood prezentată de Leu de la Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Vă salută iar fratele vostru Bobiță. Nu uitați să dați like și share, da? Nu mă păcălești. Ce faci? Muncesc. Ce să fac? Băi, eu sunt ruptă de oboseală. Bună ziua, Angela Răducanu sunt, pentru clipul cu accidentul de muncă. Să nu se vadă că sunteți la distracție, nu dă bine. Perfect. Ei câștigă mii sau zeci de mii de euro. Trebuie să stau să mă milogesc de ei să-mi dea banii mei. Fut în gură.
This man with the face broken in half?
He is a victim of an accident. He was going out from your whorehouse.
Warehouse. No, you know, funky creatures or whatever.
Drivers are very aggressive here.
Ah, yes.
Bă, futu-ți gura, mă, țită blondă spălăcită!
Sus pula, bă, muistule! Popor de curve și pești. Nu mai pot continua așa, domnule Vladimir.
Așa crezi tu.
Just off.
Yeah, and you also.
Yeah.
And
You.
Totally.
Okay. Oh, I gotta get out of this. So let me explain why we want to do that. I mean, for us, it's a film about a living death, and so it's set in contemporary Bucharest, and she gets flashbacks, if you like. There's the interspersed flashbacks of a film made in the 1980s, I think, of a taxi driver driving around Bucharest, and the idea is that we are in the future that the taxi driver dreamed of in the 1989 revolution. So, you know, we've ended the oppressive, you know, Soviet-imposed dictatorship. Here we are in the future, and that's the future. And it's a terrible film. It's a great film, but it's also very, very, very depressing and exhausting and horrible. And I wanted to use this quote then. So that was an end of the world, but this is an end of the world that here began in 1989. And this, of course, is the quote from Frank Fukuyama. We're witnessing not just the end of the Cold War, but the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. We're at the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. Very famous statement now. People are dragging it out again, obviously, because quite clearly we seem to be at another ending of the world 35 years later. And of course, he says the end of the history will be a very sad time. And he was right in that one. So we wanted to talk about the end of the world. And obviously, there are many kind of versions of this in popular culture. I mean, the destruction of cities and modernity is a long trope in popular culture. Here, the world actually ends. I think an asteroid hits. Same in this one, you know, an asteroid hits, and it's how do we deal with the end of the world? And there are different versions of that. Of course, this is the road where the world's ended, not in a physical sense, but I can't remember what, something happened, and we're reduced to this, you know, poverty, a very, very horrible and scary world if you see that film. Same with slightly more different than that. But again, you know, the end of the world comes through the zombies, and this is how we survive. There are more kind of optimistic versions of this, or partly optimistic. This is the Last of Us. So there are some utopian aspects of it, but others quite depressing as well. But these versions, this is this is the Station 11, where actually it's a good thing that the world ended, because actually it's quite nice, really, once you get your head around it. And similar to this, you know, this is the solar punk genre that's a lot, well, you know, let's not have dystopian futures. Let's look at industrial civilization kind of re-earthed, regenerated in some way. So we're not going to talk about that in popular culture, because, I mean, it's there. The destruction of the world is kind of a boring trope now, or destruction of cities, boring trope. But this one struck us. This is Blade Runner 2049. And yes, it's the end of the world, but actually the world hasn't ended. And what we see in that world is actually a world in which technological advance has continued apace. It's a high-tech world, but without all the other bits of modernity, like democracy or human rights or any form of humanist kind of shared norms. This is a brutal high-tech world in which capitalism has continued apace. And in a way, this is the living death world. This is the business as usual world. And it's one that I think we perhaps are seeing brewed somewhere in the White House as we speak in that way. And so it's this kind of end of the world we really want to look at. Now, this, you know, the political ending of a world is a theme that's now all around us in political commentary. Obviously, most obviously through the arrival of Trump in the White House. And this is a kind of an account of a meeting in 1992, actually, by John Gans, and he says 1992 is when modern America began, as in the people who are in power in the White House. And this is Murray Rothbard, who's Trump's biggest inspiration, and many of his group around him. And he's saying in 92, with the inspiration of the death of the Soviet Union before us, we know it can be done, smashing the state. We shall break the clock of social democracy. We shall break the clock of the Great Society. We shall break the clock of the welfare state. We shall break the clock of the New Deal. We shall repeal the 20th century. And this is very scary, because this, in 92, was a lunatic fringe. Now, this is the program right now before us. And what is that program? So I'm going to play a little bit of this kind of stupid video. But because here, if I can find the... Right. He's talking about
Curtis Yarvin, also known as Moldbug, the man who coined this term, unfortunately has a tendency to overcomplicate the subject when talking about it. So in this video, I shall be explaining the subject of the cathedral at length, what it means for our modern times, the misconceptions people often have about it, the problems that result from the cathedral, some unique ideas that I believe Moldbug himself gets wrong about it, and finally what can actually be done about it. So first I'll explain just what the cathedral is. In a nutshell, the cathedral is specifically referring to the media and academic institutions within the establishment. Or as Moldbug puts it, the cathedral is a short way to say journalism plus academia, and how the intellectual institutions in our society don't always have the best interest in truth and freedom, but rather work together to push a certain narrative. It can also be conflated with the red pill concept that what is presented as fact by the corporate press is a carefully constructed narrative intentionally designed to keep some very unpleasant people in power. Another way to look at it is as a source of the Overton window, which is a term that describes the range of acceptable politically correct things to say. It represents the general public perception of what I like to call correct opinions trademark. Journalists and academia have a special role in this, in that they are in a position that lets them shape the public perception and thus keep the Overton window in a location that benefits them. The reason it is called the cathedral is because of how closely the power dynamics of the current location of this window have grown over the last 50 years to resemble this strange, fundamentalist religion almost. Or again, as Moldbug puts it, intellectual institutions at the center of modern society, just as the church was the intellectual institution at the center of medieval society. For instance, you may have heard the term the cult of woke, and I've used that term on my channel before, and refers to how this cult has an
Right, and so on and so forth. Just in case you missed it, that's you. That's you. And this is, as we all know, this is common, the common parlance of the contemporary right, and in America, but across Europe. And it's a direct attack on the idea of the Enlightenment, direct and its associated thing. So here's another.
Outgroup, which it deems as
Here's another version of that. So this is Nick
Dark Enlightenment by Nick Land, narrated by an artificial intelligence based on the voice of Orson Welles, produced by Parker Banks. Part 1, Neo-reactionaries head for the exit. Enlightenment is not only a state, but an event and a process. As the designation for an historical episode concentrated in Northern Europe during the 18th century, it is a leading candidate for the true name of modernity, capturing its origin and essence. Renaissance and Industrial Revolution are others. Between Enlightenment and progressive Enlightenment, there is only an elusive difference, because illumination takes time and feeds on itself, because Enlightenment is self-confirming, its revelations self-evident, and because a retrograde or reactionary dark Enlightenment amounts almost to intrinsic contradiction. To become enlightened in this historical sense is to recognize and then to pursue a guiding light. There were ages of darkness, and then Enlightenment came. Clearly, advance has demonstrated itself, offering not only improvement, but also a model. Furthermore, unlike a Renaissance, there is no need for an Enlightenment to recall what was lost, or to emphasize the attractions of return. The elementary acknowledgement of Enlightenment is already Whig history and
right, and so on and so forth. And the point of that one, and Nick Land's a very influential figure in the far right in different ways. And he lives in Shanghai, but that's another story. It's the Dark Enlightenment says it. It's a kind of negative version of all the critiques of Enlightenment that we've seen actually over the last many years from the left. It's actually almost like a recto verso version of it. And the idea for him is the idea is, you know, he calls upon the old gods. He uses L.P. Lovecraft. I don't know if you know this guy, Cthulhu. He calls upon the old gods to come and, you know, wipe humans off the face of the earth. Because until humans are wiped off the face of the earth, the new human, the post-human, cannot emerge. I mean, I think he's mad, but he is very powerful, as I say, especially among young men, actually. So what we've got here is the idea of a dark enlightenment that he looks to as an absolute kind of counterpart to the Enlightenment. So he's out to smash the Enlightenment very much, just as, you know, the others, the politicians are there to break the clock of the 20th century. And I think this is quite problematic. And I've found this more problematic when we now go to the, let's say, the left or the progressive end of the spectrum. And I'm just using these next two examples just as there's many other ones we can do. But this is, when we were researching this, the Center for Apocalyptic Studies and Post-Apocalyptic Studies in the University of Heidelberg. This was the latest edition of the newsletter, The Joyful Extinction. And I try not to read all of this out, you can do that. But the Anthropocene teaches an important lesson. We have come to the point of no return. Extinctions are inevitable, such as the extinction of our current way of life, as the human we've known, and of non-human species. But extinctions are also positive. They open up space for the emergence of new lives and new ways of living, etc. We need to embrace extinction, all this kind of thing. And I think, and she says in that second paragraph, extinction in the future, and the future it opens, will only be joyful if animated by post-humanist principles, etc. I won't go on more of that. Seb will talk about some of that. And the point we want to make is that I think there's a real problem here, because I think we're in a real turning point. We're not just neoliberal. Something is being unraveled politically, as well as with the other kind of geopolitical and environmental problems as well. But something is being unraveled. And our fear is that part of that unravelment is about what we might call the Enlightenment. And we'll talk about that later. But certainly the idea of social democracy, the idea of a humanism, the idea of emancipation directly targeted by the right in the US and across Europe and elsewhere, but also, I think, astonishingly by the left, who I find the left who embrace this as a kind, and I see it as almost a kind of a deep naivety. And part of this we can see in this. I'll just try and do what I can to just give you a little sense of this. No? This is Doug Hines.
Sometimes a gentler language is needed in order to make the space in which people can hear and feel it. So I found myself talking about what it means to be living in a time of endings, because I think that that's a true way of naming where we find ourselves. And then this language of ruins came from various directions, and came from the subtitle of Anna Singh's book, The Mushroom at the End of the World, which is on the possibilities of life among capitalist ruins. And I thought, yeah, that's the thing, to go looking for the possibilities of life among the ruins of systems that are failing and will not be repaired. And then when I was almost at the end of writing this book, which the book didn't know it was going to be called At Work in the Ruins until it was finished, but this language was starting to come to the fore. And then I came across the work of Federico Campagna, this Italian philosopher, and there was something I heard in what he was saying. He doesn't word it quite like this, but I had the chance to sit down with him and I said, this is what I've been going around telling people. I hope I've got it right. And he said, yeah, you get it. So what I heard in his work was this: sometimes you're born into the ending of a world. This is a thing that happens. It's happened to others before you in other times and places. A sign of being born into the ending of a world is that the future, in the ordinary sense, no longer works. Because when a politician stands up and makes a speech and tries to mobilize collective hope around the future in that sense is a line drawn from the recent past through the present, onwards in a trajectory full of promise. And at the ending of a world, as Federico says, when you're in the ending of a world, the story of that world doesn't have much left to run. So when someone tries to extend that story, when they try to extend that line into the future, it no longer rings true. People can feel that at a gut level without necessarily being able to articulate or analyze it. And so what you might find in such a time is that instead, the people who are able to make political capital are the ones who speak not to the future, but to the past. And I think of the British journalist Anthony Barnett in the book that he wrote about the political events of 2016 in both the UK and the US. He said, you know, the most important words in the slogans of that year were back and again, take back control, make America great again. It's the potency of appealing to the past in a time where the story we're in doesn't have much left to run. And so Federico Campagna, he says, well, what's worth doing if it is your discernment that you were born into such a time? And he says, first, stop worrying so much about needing to make sense according to the logic of the world that is ending. And then look for ways to make good ruins. And I've been chewing on those phrases. I found myself, it happens sometimes, you get something that's just stuck in your mouth, and every conversation, every interview, every talk, these words keep coming back. And as you chew on them over months and years, they release things that you didn't see at first. And so I've begun to see in that, you know, stop worrying about making sense according to the logic of the world that is ending. Okay, who are the people who, for one reason or another, either never worried so much about making sense according to the logic of the world that we were born into, or have found the tricks and hacks and the foolish moves that allow you to slip out and around the edges of that logic, or even who are the actors who hold resources within the games of that world, who can see that it is ending and who are looking for ways to do something with the resources that they hold that might contribute to the possibility of there being worlds worth living for on the far side at this ending. And so then that becomes part of the making good ruins, because what is a ruin? It's something that's broken out of what was a whole structure. The structures of a world that comes to an end don't just vanish without trace. They leave traces, they leave ruins, and the people who are making lives in the aftermath break things loose from the ruins of the old imperial buildings and use them to make humbler homes in the place where the empire once stood. I feel like that's...
So I'd let that run a bit, and Doug and Hines, very well known on the internet. I think our response to that was, this is an abandonment of the field of politics. I think it's highly irresponsible, and it's almost quintessentially an example of a very nice, well-off person willing to contemplate the end of the world, knowing full well that they're not the ones who are going to get it in the neck when it does actually end. And this is a book that both of us reacted quite strongly against, the idea of hospicing modernity. Modernity is finished. How can we put it out of its misery? How can we give it an assisted dying? And this at a moment when, from the right, if you like, there are very powerful forces also seeking to overthrow modernity. And Doug there is there saying, oh, they're going back to the past. Well, that might be true, break the clocks. And what's he got? Oh, well, there isn't a future. The future's, there isn't, we can't give you a future. What, is that an alternative? So that's where a lot of the energy of this speech kind of came from. And what we wanted to say is we've got to start looking back at modernity properly as grown up, as adults, knowing also the seriousness of the position we're in. And Doug and Hines talking about ruins. Ruins have always been part of modernity. And this is Walter Benjamin's quote, which I won't try and unpack, but ruins have always been part of modernity. Modernity is not a thing, it's a complex thing, it's an ambiguous thing, and it's these ambiguities, but also its possibilities that we want to look at in some more detail. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Seb, who's going to carry on.
Yeah, thanks, Justin, for this brilliant setup. Thanks to Sue for this invitation. I feel really privileged, to be able to be here, and not just because of the sun and the swimming. Without much further ado, we're just going to move in. What I wanted to begin with is an image that in many ways kind of brackets the time that, we're referring to, the historical period that, we refer to as modernity. This is a knockoff of, an alteration of a very famous painting that, in many ways kind of iconizes the beginning of modernity in, romantic art. It is, and the story about this is quite interesting because these two activists of the last generation, who I'm sure you're familiar with, made it, called it, the original is called Wanderer, or a Sea of Fog, isn't it? Of Wanderer über dem Nebelmeer. And this is called Wanderer in the Sea of Fire, right? They were, kind of trying to allude or kind of point to the catastrophe that was going on, particularly also in the region where Caspar David Friedrich, the artist, lived, and there were in 2023 loads of, forest fires and so on and so on. They got into it. They didn't manage to, plug it on the painting, and I think we could do an entire, kind of aesthetic analysis of that photograph. But I'm not going to do this. So this is the original, right? the original that they just altered in this way. When Justin first showed me the Doug Hine video, I was kind of struck because I think, you know, in many ways, this is the position that our bearded design thinker of ruins is taken, right? He is not, as these activists called it, in the sea of fire, but he's above it. He is looking on from onto an apocalyptic scene from up high, you know, untouched by the catastrophe, from a position of privilege. You know, he's very kind of, you know, relaxed aristocratic pose. And you kind of expect that he kind of, you know, turns around, you know, with a kind of bemused smirk and kind of walks off, you know, into whatever, you know, the beautiful ruins. The more likely scene, you know, if you want to fictionalize this, would be Kim Stanley Robinson's opening of Ministry of the Future, where we have a heat catastrophe in India where 20 million people die. There are no happy ruins for them, you know, to go into and cool down. So I think this is, there are, I mean, you know, it's very, in many ways that vision is tempting, you know, that Doug Hine vision, but there is like really a kind of nihilism and cynicism in there that, you know, makes it almost as malevolent as, you know, the Nick Land stuff that Justin showed. I mean, you know, where the ruins, you know, flee into recent, you know, forest fires in the US or during COVID and so on and so on. So us mortals, you know, we're not part of that elevated position. Now, that's the end, some kind of end. And if we go back to the beginning, many of you will be familiar with this picture. It's a very, very iconic picture of that moment when you know, the subject kind of emerges on the scene, you know, in the kind of thinking of society and politics and culture, German Romanticism, you know, the kind of art form that expresses this very strongly. God has basically died, and now there is this world that is open that, but is foggy. You know, we don't really know what it is. The subject is alone there and has to explore this. Now, of course, you know, what then, and rightly so, you know, is being criticized, that this is also the subject that then goes on and colonizes the world and, you know, ravishes the planet and so on and so on and so on. And that is all true. But at the same time, that kind of, you know, at the time, you know, the people who kind of explored that kind of that subjectivity, that, you know, discovered, you know, the human being in that sense, you know, as an actor on the social and political scene. I mean, they were rebels. You know, this is a rendering by a former student of mine, Ananya Panya, who turned this wanderer into, you know, a punk, a rebel, a resistance fighter. And what I'm trying to show here, you know, is that the emergence of the self, of modern subjectivity, was not a smooth process by any means, but indeed also just as modernity wasn't a homogeneous historical period. And what Justin already said, that if we want a radical break with the catastrophes of modernity, and we are not defending that at all, I mean, you know, let's that be very clear. What we have to do is to engage in a meaningful way with that past. We can't just say, oh, you know, we disavow it and that's done. And that is what that hospicing, this is what kind of made us mad about that hospicing book, because it was just totally careless. You know, whatever you didn't like about the past, you call modernity. There was no analysis, nothing, you know, and that is not a way of kind of learning how to move forward. That's what we're saying. We need to be aware of the inner contradictions of modernity. We need to be aware of the inner contradictions of the Enlightenment. We need to be aware of these complexities of the past in order to move into some kind of possible future. And this is just a quick footnote, you know, for those of you interested in that period, there has recently been a book by Andrea Wolf just a few years ago that is a very accessible, provides a very kind of accessible narrative, and particularly looks at the role of women in that, which has been, you know, kind of under the table as in, you know, in so many other areas. You know, I mean, these are the philosophers, you know, Johann Gottlieb Fichte, Dorothea Veit, August Wilhelm Schelling, Novalis, the poet, Caroline Schelling. Caroline Schelling, an amazing figure. I mean, someone who's been really battered by you know, all kind. You know, 4 children died. She's been imprisoned while pregnant and with a child, but at the same time, you know, becoming this enormous figure with her second husband, August Wilhelm Schelling. She translated loads of Shakespeare, and you know, so great and to such a quality that until today, Shakespeare is played more in Germany than actually in the, you know, in the UK, which is, you know, so, you know, and also, I mean, she was first, I mean, she had 3 different husbands. One of them was Schlegel, and the other one Schelling, and so on and so on. But so also in terms of, you know, kind of interpersonal relationships, in many ways, they were ahead of, you know, where we are today. But again, that's just a footnote. Now, back to the apocalypse. This is the quote from Adorno and Horkheimer, Dialectics of the Enlightenment, 1944. And what they are saying, enlightenment, this is, you know, just the Second World War hasn't quite ended yet. And so this, in the light of these kind of dramatic events, they're saying enlightenment, understood in the widest sense of the advance of thought, was always aimed at liberating human beings from fear and installing them as masters. So for them, again, you know, these 2 things have to be thought together, right? Human beings, liberating human beings and installing them as masters is one and the same thing. And I think they're wrong there. And this is a point that has been made by many scholars and you know, philosophers and so on recently. And the probably best one of all of them is Marina Garcés, who writes a book against what she calls the enlightened illiteracy of posthumous thinking, right? And posthumous thinking is that kind of thinking, okay, the end has already happened, so, you know, let's at least be cheerful about it. What she says is, we have received the Enlightenment legacy through the catastrophe of the project of modernization in which Europe colonized and shaped the world. Yes, we did. Criticism of this project and its consequences must be constant and refined. Yes, today as well, working together with human and non-human cultures and forms of life who suffered it as an invasion, as an imposition, both inside and outside of Europe. We must do this together because the modernization agenda is putting at risk the very limits of the world we share. Absolutely. But this critique, and here it comes, precisely because it is a critique of the dogma of progress and its attendant forms of credulousness, takes us back to the roots of the Enlightenment as an attitude, not as a historical project, as a challenge to dogmas and the powers that benefit from them. So we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, is what she is saying. Mark Fisher, the late Mark Fisher was a good friend, put this in relation to when he was a school teacher, actually, to his students in terms of, we called it reflexive impotence. And he defined that reflexive impotence, which is somehow, you know, yeah, as you know, these kids, they know things are bad, but more than that, they know they can't do anything about it. But that knowledge, that reflexivity is not a passive observation of an already existing state of affairs, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that is the trap that we cannot step into, I would say. A better way forward is recently presented by the Cameroonian philosopher Achille Mbembe. He talks about a kind of regenerative universalism. This book, Brutalism, is dense and difficult, but it is essentially, he writes about what he calls a kind of state of universal blackness, of universal negritude, as the French call it, in which humanity, this is today, is increasingly transformed into pure energy. So he is talking about these technological systems, right? The technological systems, you know, that kind of reduce our humanity to, you know, well, it's kind of a matrix kind of image, isn't it? So what he is saying, and I want to read this because it's beautiful, if we want to share the world's beauty, we will have to learn to show solidarity with all its suffering. We will have to learn ourselves how to remember together and thus repair together the fabric and the visage of the world. It is therefore not a question of closing in on yourself, of allowing yourself to be haunted by the obsession of a home, of an in itself, of a transcendental in itself, but of contributing to the emergence upon an open sea of this new region of the world where all of us will be able to enter unconditionally in order to embrace, eyes wide open, the inextricable nature of the world and its untangible structure and its composite character. Now, this is a vision that I think is great. And there is to this project in common, right? He's not talking, he's trying to avoid the word universalism. He's talking about, for obvious reasons, right? So, he's talking about the project of the in common. And this project, and this is very important, has a temporal dimension. And this temporal dimension has very recently been articulated by the famous anthropologist Tim Ingold in a book called The Rise and Fall of Generation Now. And the great thing, so this is, just very quickly, it's more complicated than that, but I only use that picture. On the right, on the right, you have the plurality of generations being stacked on top of one another, right? One generation, comes after the other, replaces the other. Each generation claiming independence from the continuous process of life and taking ownership of the future, right? This is our future, not yours, ours. It is based on the assumption that the past got it wrong. Yeah, all these boomers and so on, they got it wrong. And that the road from the past is paved with errors. Now, the thing is, this is, he says, the default assumption of modernity, i.e. that the present generation knows better than the previous generations, that it can rectify their erroneous ways. The inescapable consequence of this, of course, is that the solutions offered by the present generation will turn out, in due course, as equally erroneous. Which is to say that somewhat paradoxically, the current attempt that we have on the left and the right, but maybe more on the left, to cut ourselves off from the modern past, remains itself locked in a deeply modern understanding of time. And what Tim Ingold is saying, that that doesn't make a lot of sense. That doesn't help us. And instead, he is arguing, and this is on the left, for a different model, not of generations stacked on top of each other, but of generation. It is a model often found in traditional societies. Ingold uses the analogy of the rope here, right? The rope that kind of winds around, these different strands are winding around each other. As he puts it, the rope is a record, memory rewound. The process of generation signifies a constant begetting in common. It is helpful to express this, perhaps, maybe some agential realists here, of Karen Barrett's agential realism. It is a model of intraactive becoming. Matter, as they put it, Barrett, does not refer to an inherent fixed property of abstract independently existing objects. Rather, matter refers to phenomena in their ongoing materialization. And that kind of notion of time, of generation, of begetting, the future is what Ingold, suggests us to take into account when kind of thinking about, our current historical period situation, the flow of life, really. What this means for the present argument is that any attempt to simply disavow the modern past is illusory and futile. We need to care about the continuous process of life, of the ongoing materialization that Barrett speaks of. Our present was begot by modernity. It remains entangled, another important notion for Barrett's agential realism, in modernity. Only by carefully analyzing its complexities and inner contradictions will we be able to redirect the flow of time towards something that, something like what Achille Mbembe calls a project of the in common. I think we both have made that point now, and I think it's pretty clear. Yeah. So that was work, and now fun. Yes.
So yeah, so it's this idea of the idea of actually confronting modernity in all its difficultness, its ambiguity, and that we must engage in a dialogue with that. And if there's, and we're sponsored by the EU Centre, but if there's any part of it, certainly of a European culture that's more ambiguous and difficult, it's perhaps Wagner. And we call this apocalypse or Gotterdammerung. And to explain that, apocalypse is an outside catastrophe. It's whether the gods or the asteroid or the microbe or the robots or the aliens, whatever, we are destroyed for all sorts of reasons, probably because we're sinned. I don't know. Are we bad people? Do we need to be cleansed? Gotterdammerung is equally catastrophic in the sense of a world is destroyed. But for Wagner, it's a world that's destroyed in order to then allow a truly human future. And of course, Wagner was involved in 1848, the big revolutions right across Europe, and he got nearly arrested in the uprising in Dresden, which was in 1849, and he's big mates with Bakunin, the Marx's arch anarchist rival, and he goes into exile, and he's in exile in Zurich, and he starts this opera, and this opera, which is this 16-hour monster, is his attempt to write the revolution in art. And he's very much influenced by a guy called Feuerbach and a philosopher called Feuerbach, who some of you might know. He's the philosopher that Marx argued with in his 12 theses on Ludwig Feuerbach, where he says he ends by saying, philosophers have interpreted the world in different ways. The point is to change it. So that's his response to Feuerbach. And Feuerbach was very influential. And what Feuerbach said in a terribly reductive nutshell is, religion is not stupid. It's not just an idiotic kind of superstition. That's the Enlightenment view. It's a superstition. Actually, religion expresses real human needs, real human meaning, but we give it to the gods. And the task of modernity is to bring it back from the gods and make it human again. We have to, and in many ways, the Ring is an attempt to do that, to start that. Now, this is slightly entertaining because I won't give you the 18-hour synopsis of the Ring, but basically, the gods start off like, Wagner's quite explicit about this, the gods build this glittering castle in the sky, in Valhalla, but it's built on power, greed, lust, gold, the Ring. And the 16 hours is about how that collapses. And right at the end, with the son, I think, of somebody who's betrayed right at the beginning of the opera, comes back and declares war on the gods. And I saw this, it's such a great production, and I can't help thinking of Nick Land, so I thought I'd play it for you. Because this is what we're facing on the other side of things. This is one version of the end of the world that I don't think we want. I don't think you need translation here. Okay. And I don't need, I could be very crass, and it just made me think of the Capitol in, you know, what was it, November the 20th, January the 20th. You know, there's something deeply anarchic, anarchic about that in a way. So, but also just to go back to the ambiguity thing, there's so many residencies there, and it's quite made explicit at the end. You know, they're not quite swastikas on those people's arms. The words, you know, it's quite clearly a reference to the Nazi past, and Wagner's own implication in the Nazi past is very deep. He was absolutely dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semite. Hitler was his biggest fan, etc. All his wife became, you know, part of the Wagner / Nazi cult. So really, really compacted here. What we're trying to say is here in some of the darker bits of European culture, the most ambiguous European culture, there is those ambiguities that we must have a dialogue with. We must have a dialogue with, and part of that is, and I think going back to Wagner himself, and there's a great book, I don't know if you've ever read it, by Marshall Berman called "All That Is Solid Melts into Air." Great book about the ambiguities and the conflictions within modernity. And I always remember in the preface, he said, I really wanted to write about Wagner, but I couldn't, so he never managed to. Wagner had two endings. So this is him in Zurich, the ex-revolutionary, licking his wounds, and his ending is to the whole 16 hours was called the Feuerbach ending. And this is that the gods have gone, and the Valhalla has been burnt down, and now it's a time for humans. He calls it, you know, it's about joy, about love. It's about human. Now it's the truly human future. It's when we begin to build a human world when the gods have gone, and we'll look at that in a minute. But then some wrong, I don't know, Amazon delivery, he found another book while he was in Zurich by Schopenhauer, who was, of course, the arch pessimist. And of course, Wagner was very much taken by Schopenhauer. And he read his thing, and he changed the ending. And he changed the ending from the gods have gone, now is a human future, to the gods have gone, actually, and now we can all go into oblivion. We can all disappear into, as he says. So, you know, this is Brunhilde at the end, before she throws herself in the flames, and she says, you know, and where do I go? I depart from the home of desire. It's all very Buddhist, Zen, Schopenhauer. I depart forever the home of delusion. The open gates of eternal becoming I close behind me now. To the holiest chosen land, free from desire and delusion, the goal of the world's migration, redeemed from incarnation, the enlightened woman now goes. So this is a very kind of Eastern, as interpreted by Europe, Eastern enlightenment. The enlightenment, the world is a veil of illusion, the Maya. And the blessed end of all things, eternal. Do you know how I attained it? Anyway, through love. So love in here. So there's these two endings, and it's really interesting how that they operate within Wagner. And at the end, he set neither of these. He just says, well, he didn't say, Brunhilde says, right, rest, you gods. Time to rest, which can mean either of these things. Again, it's this idea. He himself deeply conflicted. So if you know anything about Wagner, he goes on to build this huge temple to himself and his art, and the Kaiser comes there, and Hitler comes there, blah blah blah. But actually, in 1850, he says this. He says, "This is what I want to do with my opera. I'd erect in a beautiful meadow a crude theatre of boards and beams, equipped with such decor and machinery for the performance of Siegfried. Anyone who travels there will be ensured a free entry. I will arrange 3 performances, and after the third, the theatre would be torn down and my score burnt. And for those who enjoyed the thing, I would say, now go and do the same." And I forgot, I was wanted to put the slide, famous slide from Sniffing Glue in, you know, the great punk magazine, from where they say, here's one chord, here's another chord, there's a third, now go and form a band, you know. So you can see it's people there. So yeah, this was my entertainment way of doing that. And I'm just going to show the very end of the 16-hour opera, a little bit of the end. And this was, it's quite famous in that this was 1976. I'm not a musicologist. This is 1976, and this is Pierre Boulez, the kind of leftist hero of the avant-garde, I suppose, the French avant-garde, musical avant-garde. And he, for my mind, clearly wants the Feuerbach ending there. And he stages it so that what we see at the end is that, yes, the end of the gods, but actually a human future kind of on the horizon. So I'm going to try and see if I can get that. If you to the end. Oh, sorry. Anyway, she's thrown herself in. Spoiler, damn. Well, this is it, yeah. And so that, yeah. I suppose there are certainly ruins here, and there's certainly a world ending, but it's not one that's about the end. That's about the new kind of world. It's possible. There's relays and stuff. Lots of stress. I'll let you watch that at your leisure. And oh, there we go. So entertainment over. Back to the serious stuff.
Yeah, well, that was quite serious entertainment. But the question that arises out of that is why does it seem so difficult for our societies to, commit to and generate the image and the reality of such a human future? And what is the role of art and aesthetic production and all of this? And I found it very helpful to look at a kind of a little bit eccentric figure, Frédéric Lordon, who is a rare breed of a Spinozist economist. So an economist who is steeped in a French economist who is steeped in the philosophy of the 17th century Jewish Dutch philosopher Baruch Spinoza. Lordon's, So Lordon's thinking, he's also a philosopher, but I think Spinoza's economist just sounds fantastic. Lordon's thinking starts from the assumption expounded by Spinoza's ethics that social life cannot be reduced to the rule of reason. It is always also governed, and this is right, Spinoza, by passions and affects, and this applies, I get, to the kind of gut politics that we have today. Following the Spinoza, Lordon defines the political body. I mean, Spinoza was always talking about bodies, so this is about the political body. It's a union of parts which are arranged in a certain relation to one another. And this certain relation is to a significant degree determined by the passions and affects. This emotional charge, Lordon explains, is necessary for a political body to form in the first place. Effective investment in the political body, it is what keeps the centrifugal forces at bay. So you need passion in order to begin society, in the first place. And what Lordon says is what a body can do, and this is the famous line of Spinoza, of course, we don't know yet what the body can do, depends on the configuration of its ingenium. The ingenium is the product of vestigial traces inscribed in the body, is the memory of the practices of a body, the durable stabilization of its habits, and the re-expression of its affective susceptibilities in their contemporary complexion. In other words, the ingenium describes the sedimented memories of a body's previous behaviors, with the efficacy depending on the extent to which they have been stabilized into habits. In this sense, the ingenium is what measures that which tells us what the body can do. And that is, okay, like to illustrate this, you might be familiar with Thomas Jefferson's saying that, well, and it's something that we are a little bit tempted to use. I kind of used it today, which is, he said, the government you elect is the government you deserve. What Laudon says is, yeah, but minus the cynicism. You know, the government that you elect is the government that this society is able to elect, right? So the election of the government is an expression of that ingenium, of the capacity to act, of that kind of agency that the society in this moment has. And as we see, the American society, but also the Australian and our kind of European and so on societies, I mean, the ingenium is quite battered, isn't it? I mean, there isn't much left. Right, this is a crucial difference as it shifts the questions from a certain terrain of cynical judgment to that of analysis. And that is important because if we look at, you know, that's what he said, neoliberal poisoning has made the political bodies capable of less and less, which is no doubt the point of the exercise. Whatever particular individuals may think of this, they nevertheless have to acknowledge that the whole of which they are part has lost some of its vitality. It's not the fault of anyone, but rather the measure of their power, of that impotence that we are subject to at the moment. And I think this has a lot to do with what I would like to call, following people like the French philosopher Bernard Stiegler, or again, Mark Fisher, the aesthetic impoverishment of you know, our contemporary society and the depletion of its social sensorium. So of that, you know, the kind of space in which we are able to feel ourselves kind of towards a possible future. And again, this was, and again, Ananya Panya who made this kind of very nice illustration of the social fabric being deprived gradually of, you know, its imaginative faculties, you know, if you will. Art and, you know, kind of cultural production have played a bit of an ambiguous role in this. And I think, and this is what I'm writing about at the moment, kind of the, you know, anesthetic of contemporary society. I think what we have done over the last, you know, 30 or so years is to have built a kind of an infrastructure for the kind of aesthetic capacities of our society that are just kind of, yeah, that put us to sleep, that make us feel less and less, and you know, instead of expanding the social sensorium or shrinking it. And one of the you know, what part of that infrastructure is, of course, the invention of neoliberal subjectivity. This is the famous Apple 1984 app that was, I mean, it was only screened once at the Super Bowl, but you know, Mark called this the most influential film you know, of the past decades. It is an exercise in dream engineering, codifying, you know, as he says, the ideological superiority of networked individualism over the supposed gray conformity of collectivity and bureaucratic organization. If you haven't seen this, it really is a very, very important document. Watch it. There are, yeah, I mean, you just see that, you know, everything that is not Mac is basically, you know, some kind of blend of, you know, Soviet dictatorship and fascism. They actually casted skinheads for that, you know, for these people that are sitting there and watching Big Brother, and then she comes in and smashes this hammer into the screen. Another dimension of this anesthetic infrastructure is what Justin has extensively written about, which is the translation of that imaginary that the Apple app expresses into the Australian and European context, which is the creative industries. And interestingly, yeah, we put Schiller in the middle of the TED talk, because what is the creative industries as an ideology? What is it if not the kind of resuscitation of the romantic genius as the creative entrepreneur? Yeah, I mean, with all the catastrophic consequences that Justin and the Reset Collective have documented, you're all familiar with this, so I don't have to move deeper into this. There's also, of course, the great digital swindle, the idea that, with digital technology, we will be more creative, we will be more, we will be freer. And of course, there's this notion of universalized negritude of Achille Mbembe suggests this is not the case, but we also know this. The Social Dilemma, a wonderful documentary by loads of these engineers who have invented things like, the like bottom, Facebook and so on, actually speak out against what they have invented. At the end of the documentary, they ask how much screen time, do your kids get, and all of them across say 0, right? So they know what they've done is extremely hurtful and dangerous. And Jonathan Haidt's wonderful psychological study, he's a psychologist, shows this. His massive data sets, and he can really show that this shift from what he calls a child-based to a screen-based childhood, from a play-based to a screen-based childhood, has been, extremely hurtful to us, to our kids. Right. If we concentrate more on the actual art world, then there is this idea of the resortization of art, which Isabel Groh, who is the editor of an important European journal called Texte zur Kunst, she talks about, resortization, literally, big galleries opening branches in luxury resorts like the Hamptons and Monaco, and so on, but also, and particularly in the course of COVID, the kind of moving into the digital of the showrooms. She talks about the new mode of value production that actually excludes the art object itself from considerations of its value. Experts, critics, academics, all these cathedral builders, go out of the window. And, she sees something here like the extraction of art from the public sphere. And we can even make a more kind of radicalize this argument by saying, but there's also something else. There's also art literally disappearing from our view into a great network of free ports and these kind of, no sovereign, kind of non-sovereign or kind of excluded, free of sovereign rule spaces that are usually located in the catacombs or near airports. This is Geneva Airport, which hosts the world's most extensive art collection. It's an estimated value of $100 billion hosted in these structures, about 1.2 million artworks, which is 6 times what MoMA has in New York. And they are, stored and traded in these elegant bunkers for reasons of flexibility and tax evasion. And that means that basically art becomes a pure means of investment. That's all it is. It is very flexible. And of course, it disappears from view and from the public sphere. This is a scene from Christopher Nolan's Tenet, which is, it's a mad film, bit insane. But the brilliant move that he makes is that, I don't know if you've all seen it, but it's a weird kind of also meditation on the nature of time and kind of time machine revisited. He has this contraption called the turnstile that reverses the flow of time. And the brilliant move is to put it in a free port in the midst of, you know, an art collection. So again, you know, these points that Graw makes, evacuation from social life and discourse, degrading as a means of investment, and really becoming part and parcel of extractive capitalism are here again. And this is Justin, who wanted to tell us a little bit about foundational economy, but we're going to skip this. This is a wonderful book, and you have to read it. It blew my mind, and it is, yeah, okay, we were saying we're not going to talk about it, because otherwise it's going to be 9. Yeah, just exactly, a message from the sponsors, that's it. Instead, let me go back to that image, because it's not just the disappearance from public life, the invisibility, the degradation of art, you know, as a, you know, social practice. There's also something else going on. And we understand this if we look at the American sociologist's work, Quinn Slobodian's work. He has written a wonderful book on free ports called Crack Up Capitalism, where he shows that the development of this network of free ports since the 80s is really a concerted attempt by capital to divorce democracy from capitalism, or rather capitalism from democracy. And this is important. This is really important for us, because what it means is that it problematizes something that has actually been an enormously, you know, positive development, which is the current efforts to revise collections and curatorial practices according to the criteria of inclusivity and diversity. Provoked by the international Black Lives Matter movement and a general campaign to decolonize the Western canon, these are crucial and in many cases long overdue measures whose significance goes beyond simply balancing collections and canons. They have the potential of generating conditions of unprecedented aesthetic encounters that will not just benefit the contemporary art world, but enrich the social sensoria of our society. So, you know, expansion rather than shrinking. So this is great. This is great stuff. You know, that has to happen. And it's very important that it happened, and it was way too late, and so on and so on. However, in order to be effective, the focus of these efforts must be expanded to also include the anesthetic infrastructure of the contemporary art world, because as long as you have these kind of turnstile constructions, you know, this you know, infrastructure that can turn, you know, any artwork into a means of investment, it means that you can produce the most progressive art world, and this is then, you know, fed into this machine, and can, you know, finance anything, you know, right-wing campaigns, fascism, racism, whatever. So just thematically kind of rejuvenating the art world is not enough. We have to go and, you know, start reconstructing, you know, the anesthetic infrastructure into an aesthetic one. And one brilliant argument that we can use here comes from Olufemi Otaiwo, a Nigerian-American philosopher, whose book Elite Capture is about this is actually great, because what he says is, okay, this above all illustrates the key problem of, he writes against something that he calls the politics of deference, right? So the problem with deference, he says, is it focuses the very capacity that we have to reconstruct the whole house to the specific rooms that have already been built for us. It advertises itself as deferring to marginalized voices and perspectives, but in conceding so much creative space to the blueprint of society, by talking in root, it is perhaps better understood as deference to the built structure of society. So what he's saying, that instead of making sure that, you know, often anyway, kind of, you know, the elitist voices are all balanced out in the room, what we have to do is to rebuild a house. And the last 90 minutes of my presentation, I would like to spend on 3 ways in which, you know, I, from my very kind of regional European perspective, see this happening, so that we end on a note, you know, I mean, we're all going to fall asleep, but at least it's going to be hopeful. slumber. The first example actually is something that I'm almost sure most of you know, was the last Documenta 15 in Germany in 2022. The Documenta, for those who don't know it, is the biggest art show in the world. Takes place every 5 years. It's an extremely highly political event. It's opened by the German Chancellor and so on and so on. So like a high-profile event. And what the Germans did is they invited for the first time, the world's most important contemporary art exhibition made a serious attempt to push itself, and thus the international art world, beyond its own limits with regard to both its artistic content and its social economic structures. Its ambition was to present artistic practices that fall outside the Western mold, while organizing the exhibition based on the principles of collectivity, communal resource sharing, and equal allocation. So this is lumbung. This is the communal rice barn in Indonesia. They use this as a model for the collective sharing, within while curating the art exhibition. So quite a kind of high risk thing to do, for the Germans to say, come in, do this. Okay, so Ruangrupa, that was the name of that group, invited 67 artist collectives, mainly from the Global South, who in turn invited other artists and collectives, which led to about 1,000 people showing their work, giving talks or performances, tend vegetable plots, and, at least during the first few weeks, engaged with those visiting the communal spectacle. Many of the artworks presented at Documenta 15 engaged with the lives of often marginalized communities and their cultural practices. There was quite a lot of work documenting the diversity of communal life in social, cultural, and political terms. The most exciting aspect of the exhibition was that it showed in the many ways in which artistic practice can be an integral part of or interwoven with everyday life. And this is something that I think we're missing in the West, or especially if it's a rather challenging life. So at the moment when the social sensorium is shrinking and the aesthetic experiences is increasingly being evacuated, taking over by the flatness of the screen and the banality of marketing and so on and so on, this could have been a wonderful and enriching discussion. However, that didn't happen, and that didn't happen because of course, as you know, the anti-Semitism scandal. This big painting that you see in the back there. There was one or two figures that were clearly, kind of malevolent depiction of Jews. And so the whole thing collapsed. I mean, the established German art world was already mad that these kind of non-artists were taking over their space. On the other hand, also the Ruangrupa and the German colleagues who we kind of helped them to curate were not great in communicating. So there was a collapse, and the whole thing. This is in Germany now. This is known as the anti-Semitism Documenta, which is terrible. Because it was such a, it was such a, again, it was a unique opportunity, and great that the Germans tried this, but it just shows how difficult it is, and we were talking with Sue before that, all these conflicts around the world developing, and how it makes it, for cultures, more and more difficult to take any kind of position, which, without being, yeah, either from being cancelled from all kinds of, sides. It's just, yeah, makes a kind of, okay. But again, this was an attempt, and, many, not in Germany, but at least in the Netherlands, and I know also with many other European countries, there are loads of kind of knockoff projects where this huge group of artists, you know, in one way or another, is involved in continuations of this. So the conversation takes place. The question is that conversation or the conversations that have been, you know, initiated here, are they going to be, and that was, I think, also one of the important things, are they really going to talk about the economic foundations? Because that's what they wanted to do. And that was the important thing about Lumpung. Okay. Second house building exercise is this, Haus der Statistik. This is a mind-blowing project. I mean, the other one was also, but this is unbelievable because, yeah, also because it hasn't failed yet. This is right in the middle of Berlin, a radically participative urban development project of unprecedented scale that was actually started by artists. It's located, for those of you who know Berlin, oh yeah, right. Central space in East Berlin, and but I still want to point out, I'll be back, Mike. It's very close. It's, you know, it's very central. It's kind of prime real estate, and so yeah, really exciting, right in the middle. And this is what happened in 2015. So there's a group of artists, urban activists who kind of see that there's, you know, this empty former Stalinist, I mean, the House of Statistics, right? It was the Statistics Institute of East Germany. And so what they do is they produce this fake banner. They put, yeah, it's probably playing around with the pedals too much. It is saying, okay, you know, Berlin and Europe are building these spaces for art, culture, and, you know, social matters, putting it up and getting into enormous, you know, not enormous, but, you know, in quite some legal trouble, but also generating a lot of, you know, publicity. So, you know, people become aware of it from, what's going on there? Then, you know, months of strategizing, you know, assemblies, political lobbying, and so on occur. And then, weirdly enough, in 2017, this project becomes the model project Haus der Statistik, and finds its way into the coalition contract between the Social Democrats and the Green Party, and they get their legit banners, you know, finally. This is something that happens in Berlin for several reasons. It's an amazing documentary called Capital B, which shows you the kind of prehistory. It's basically a documentary that shows the relationship between, you know, real estate politics and culture after the fall of the wall, because very quickly what happens is that because of the kind of unclear juridical situation of much of the real estate in the East, capital cannot invest for about a year, 2 years, or something like that. And that is the moment when all these artists from the entire world come to Berlin, because you can do whatever you want, because there's that space that belongs to no one and everyone. And that experience, you know, and then, you know, capital comes back, and many of those, you know, party people turn into political activists because they tasted, you know, what life outside of capital, you know, can be. You know, they were, what, creative entrepreneurship? No, fuck it. You know, this is what we want to do. And so that is a 5-part documentary by Florian Opitz, produced by a production firm, independent production firm called Port-au-Prince. Wonderful people. And that again, you know, this is what made Berlin special, and that also produces a lot of, you know, knowledge and expertise in kind of dealing with, you know, that are mobilized now in this Haustat statistic project. What they try to do, try to pull off is something pretty new, which is called a public-civic partnership. And you are familiar with public-private partnerships, of course. They don't function usually, but the public-civic partnership is, you know, the kind of working together of civil society and government. What they do is they form this governing body called Co-op 5, which hosts this Zusammenkunft civil. This is basically a corporation that the artists and activists, you know, who started the project have founded, and then you have you know, the mayor, the senate, the investment, real estate investment, and housing association. They come together and they pull this project together as Modellprojekt Haus der Statistik. This is a crucial break with any kind of, you know, creative city making or anything like that. It's not an art project at all, right? I mean, they started it, they are involved in it, but this is really about participatory city development. Very mixed. There is, you know, social housing. There is market price housing. There is the tax office is going to move in there. Also, the mayor is going to move in there. The green bits are kind of culture, and that's, you know, the stuff that the artists and activists, you know, will organize. There is all kinds of stuff going on there. This is the timeline. It's still, you know, a huge building site, and it's going to be planned to be delivered in 2032. So, you know, kind of a long-term view there. But in the meantime, there's loads of, you know, activities going on around the building site. This is what these temporary spaces that they put up there look like. So the idea is that not to wait until this thing is, is done, but to accompany the development process with actually activities, and they are quite diverse. So this is yeah. So I mean, I would call this regenerative urban development that takes on board all kinds of social issues. They've been very strong in the migration. You know that Germany you know, took loads of migrants with Merkel, you know, wir schaffen das, and so on and so on. So, you know, they were very active, you know, in the field of migration, circular economy, social justice. But they do this, of course, you know, in cooperation with trying to push the limits of the changing, you know, kind of governmental conditions of possibility. It's not a red-green government, but the conservative government now in Berlin, but they're still going. This is the forefront, and I really like this because, I mean, I grew up in East Germany, right? I was 16 when I was on the street, you know, and helping to make the wall fall. And we had loads of these murals, right? And I always wondered what they would look like if we did them today. You know, what would they show? And this is a friend of mine who's also in that Capital B film, German-Afghan designer. And anyway, great. On top it says alles, Alexanderplatz is that central square, and this is Alles Andersplatz, which means everything different place, right? So many artists and cultural producers are involved in this project, but this is not an art project. Again, you know, with a nod to Barat, would probably call this diffractive art practice, i.e. a situation in which artists consciously encounter the obstacle of a structurally dysfunctional art world and decide that they need to put their talent and care into the regeneration of the infrastructure that makes that, you know, that would make the art world possible, kind of, you know, recharging the social fabric, you know, with aesthetic possibility and experience. Regeneration, you know, of the aesthetic infrastructure, which I would say is the work that needs to be done. And the last kind of house building, the third example, is something for which I probably hand over to Justin again. But I'm going to stay here. Do you want to? You don't? We do it together?
Yeah.
So this is, I mean, I don't know how many of you have been to Melbourne, because this is Liam Young's Planet City, and is a vision of a future where we all live in one city, Planet City, a city of 10 billion people, and the rest of the, of the planet is going back to regenerate. And that is, I've interviewed him a month ago for a journal that I, in the past edited with Justin, called Making and Breaking. Emma wrote in that as well. And what he said is that he believes that this kind of ecological imagination that we have might have worked, in the 60s, but with the state of kind of technological and social development, we can't go back to this. We have to move forward. And so he has this radical commitment to urban density, to urbanity, to size, to, in a way, modernism. And it's trying to aesthetically, I think it's highly problematic, but I also think it's a really interesting provocation. And it's just because when we think about urban density, we think about this as something that is weird and dirty, and I think that's good. We should kind of evaluate the weird and the dirty, because it's also sexy. It's also it's the kind of promiscuity of the city that generates so much new life and ideas and possibly ways of this is not living in the ruins. I mean, this is kind of maybe taking the logic of modernity to an extreme.
No, I'm just saying one final word, really, which is that going back to the beginning, what should we expect? The film, don't expect too much. That's right. Don't expect. It's actually our job to make that happen. I mean, one of the problems of 1990, the revolution in the East, was not a revolution. The collapse. The collapse, people came out of the ruins. So there were some of them. And if we are to face the futures, we must make them. And to abandon it to some kind of romanticism of of kind of post-apocalyptic landscape, I think is a real disaster. We need politics, but also what Seb has been saying, we need the ingenium, we need the capacity to make the world anew, and art and culture is part of that remaking of our capacity. That's what it's for. We need other things as well, but it's absolutely part of that. So on that note, I'm going to end and see if anybody's got anything to say after that massive stuff we've just thrown at you. Well, and if anybody has anything to say, Satu's got the microphone. And we'll just have a few and then we can.
Dear God, okay, I'm full of wine and I'm tired, so forgive me. But as a existential pessimist, I kind of kept thinking, so what happens to hope? What does it look like? Because I haven't read Achille Mbembe's that book, but what he's describing there, it's in a way an idea of hope, which is outside of this Pollyanna toxic positivity bullshit. And it actually means rolling your rolling your sleeves up and doing the hard work of hoping, even though potentially we will all die. And that's that. Sorry, I did not mean that. So is there, what does hope look like in light of your work? Like, you know,
You mean, oh yeah, all right. No, I mean, hope looks like, I mean, for me, being able, you know, in a time that is so conflicted and fucked up in many ways, you know, pulling off a project of, I mean, I didn't even say that, you know, 120,000 square meters in the middle of Berlin, and, you know, make it really kind of turning a page on city of development. I mean, in the scale of things, this is still small, but, you know, the fact that there are, you know, creative people, artists, who kind of understand the need of a city. I mean, I interviewed many of them, and they, you know, they talked about their work. I mean, they're not saying, "Oh, this is art, what I'm doing," you know, but more in terms of, I mean, if you organize something like that, you can't have like a, you know, full-blown art practice next to it, but it's kind of that kind of caring for, yeah, you know, for the collective, you know, if you will, and the fact that people think that this is still worth doing in that these times of polarization and hatred and ressentiment is something that gives me immense hope. And also, you know, again, you know, that invitation of Ruan Grupa, and but they were trying to do the work, and of course, you know, the first time around it didn't work, so we would have to do it again. It's not going to happen again, right? At least not there at the Documenta. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, as long as, you know, things like that happen, and I'm sure, you know, you have collectives doing similar things here. You know, there's hope. We can't.
So it sounds like we pick up ourselves again after we fall on our asses.
Yeah, but what we're not doing is, you know, doing this kind of aristocratic move of saying, from the ruins are going to, no. I mean, you can, you know, be as soft-spoken as you want, you know, but no, this is, yeah, no.
For some reason, when you're talking about East Berlin, I grew up in Poland during communism, and the grey and those apartments. And one of the things that kind of hope was encoded into the collective was repainting the buildings into different colors.
Yeah, but that was ridiculous, wasn't it?
It was. But it was that kind of like, you know, underhanded kind of thing.
No, but you know what's interesting? We organized, like in the south of Germany, I've been a lot in Germany recently for some reason. We organized like, we basically squatted some office building with 30 students or so from, or maybe 30, 40 students from all over Europe. And there were, most of them were architecture students. And the question was, it was kind of a slight, I mean, not dilapidated, but kind of starting to being run down kind of industrial area. And they had the task of kind of thinking, you know, what could happen here? And, you know, being all kind of bourgeois, you know, middle class architecture kids, of course, you know, they all had, you know, Anat Singh's book and blah, 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 and oh, we have to make everything green and so on and so on. And then I, you know, so what we were trying to do from the kind of art side of things was trying to challenge this kind of middle class imagery. And I told him about me. I showed him a few pictures of me kind of growing up in, you know, in these what we call labor boxes, you know, in East Germany and so on. And it was amazing because the Romanians, they totally, I mean, they like, they didn't live in, I mean, or maybe they were very small kids, you know, in socialism, but they could relate to that idea of, you know, your home rather than being your castle. And I don't want to be nostalgic about it, because there's nothing to be nostalgic about. But, you know, the kind of different understanding of, you know, of living as something, as, you know, a house or a flat as something that opens up to a greater collective, that was still reverberating in that young generation. And one of those kids told me that she was a bit ashamed of that, and because I kind of put it in a kind of different light, she was like, yeah, it was great, you know, I have to call my mom, blah, blah, you know. So these ideas, they live on, you know, in one way or another. The question is just, you know, to be bold enough to mobilize them again. and not be intimidated by, you know, all kinds of, we can't, I mean, that's the thing that we can't afford, that we cannot let us be intimidated. I think.
Absolutely. Thank you.
There's someone else. Great. Okay. Thank you. Really lots to think about there, and some that really does challenge the way we've been doing hope and response to the difficult political times that we're in. So a real lot to think there about, and thank you for that. I'm remembering that the tagline for the Apple ad was why 1984 is not going to be like 1984.
Exactly.
And yet it is like, you know, we are in that world, and also in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which was the more anesthetic version of the future dystopia. So I'm hoping that you will address that in your book on anesthetics. But I'm also...
We'll talk about that.
Okay, great. I'm also wondering, you know, I haven't read Hospicing Modernity yet. It's been on my list of things to read. And so I'm not speaking from a place of having read that book, but I'm just wondering if you guys are going to address how appealing it is to be able to hospice modernity and shuffle it out. That part of what we do, you know, what we want to do is get on with what's the rebuilding phase, but what you're asking us to do is pay more attention to that difficult, the intertwinedness of what we got from the Enlightenment with what went really, really bad. And that's, you know, that's a hell of a lot more work than hospicing modernity, where we can, you know, shuffle it out the room. So you've given us, 4 points for hope and suggestions. And I really think the civic, the public civic partnership is something to really think about there, as well as that history of assemblies and things like that. But I'm wondering, how your thoughts might address how we deal with refusing what is so appealing and in many ways easier in that hospicing modernity of just getting rid of it.
I'll just say, I mean, what do we mean by getting rid of it? Where are we when we've stepped out of it? I find that it's incredibly naive. And I was reading something by Judith Butler recently, where she talks about stepping out from modernity and walking among the non-humans. And it reminds me of what something Sartre said about the end of the world. You know, we cannot think the end of the world in that way, because there's no camera. Where's the camera filming the world without any humans in it? Who is this person looking at? It's a real conceit to think that we can think beyond, outside modernity and put it away. That's at a philosophical level. We will always be in it because we are always part of it. Of course, we extend it and push it, but we cannot go back before it. And if we do go back before it, that's the right-wing thing. It's a very, very dark place indeed. So how we push it forward, and I think two things of many things that, you know, that we've said today, you know, one of them is, I think, let's go back to Kant, you know, what is enlightenment, you know, his famous book. It's our escape from, or our overcoming of our self-imposed immaturity. We set, you know, and we know everything that could, you know, the wander on top of the mountain, but we need to overcome our self-imposed immaturity to become autonomous. And surely that's part of what any form of enlightenment is. And enlightenment's not monopolized by Europe by any means. That's one version of it. And the other thing is Seb's reference to Tim Ingold, that any idea of culture is about our connection to the past and our connection to the future. That's the answer to your hope thing. To my definition of no hope is when you think your kid is going to live in a really, really shit world, you know, which many people are thinking about now. And if people look at their kids, oh my God, you know, so it's linking to the past and linking to the future, you know, Benjamin's emancipation of the future, but also an emancipation of the past. And that's what culture does, it ties us together. And the idea that we can step outside of that, pick a few bricks from the ruins and build some solar punk encampment on the side, I found that so politically naive, I can't believe it.
Yes, I mean, Thanks. I mean, that is a beautiful question. I'm looking forward to that discussion about the anesthetics of 1984. But we have to ask ourselves as academics, what are we doing? Because for an academic, yes, I can write papers and perform that stepping out. But I mean, look around you. Where is that happening in Australia? Where is it happening in the US? Where a few breathing exercises, you know, and kind of anthropological design thinking applied to, it's not, you know, I mean, for many, many years, you know, I went like twice a year to Plum Village where Thich Nhat Hanh, you know, when he was still alive, was teaching. A friend of mine was a monk there. And yeah, it was great, stepping out of the world for 2 weeks. But I mean, you know, it's not changing anything, right? And the idea that you are going to convince MAGA people and, you know, the right, that they're going to join you in your, you know, meditation session. I mean, what do you think the chances of this are? So what does that mean? You know, I mean, there are many, you know, and I appreciate, you know, intellectual potency and you know, the brilliance of some of the, you know, post-human, transhuman, and so on, you know, scholars. But as long as you're just saying that you're meeting the university halfway, but you're not, you know, down there in society changing anything, then what is it worth? I mean, how believable are you? So, in other words, yeah, I mean, there's no way around politics. It doesn't work. We either do politics and, you know, change the world, or we do that kind of, you know, performative, therapeutic, you know, gymnastics as, you know, as academics, and feel that we are right. Oh, we're right, you know, but politics is not about being right. Politics is about being, you know, getting enough people to kind of, you know, mobilize to follow that path and change the world. Being right is worth nothing, because you know, the next generation is going to tell you that you know, that you were wrong. You know, that is that Tim Ingold. It's a beautiful book. I mean, that is a wise man, really. I mean, and so is Achille, but he is just a bit more demanding. But yeah, anyway, yeah, sorry, yeah. You got me fired up in spite of jet lag. That's nice. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I guess coincidentally, I found it very relevant because I'm currently writing a paper about the resilience of crafts in the event of calamity. And I guess that's in the context of, you know, the people that are really interested in learning craft skills at the moment are preppers, people who are preparing to survive apocalypse. But this is really, seems to me, a Western preoccupation. You know, there's that Cormac McCarthy, The Road kind of imagination of what's going to happen to the world. And I know that that's also kind of true a little bit in Japan, but I don't think it's the same way in China, you know, which is booming, you know, in some senses of their culture. And so my question is about Eurocentrism. If we think about the way that the Western culture imagines time, that it's teleological, that has a purpose. You know, this is based in Judeo-Christian ideas of the rapture, you know, or Scandinavian ideas of Ragnarok, which might have something to do with Wagner's Ring cycle. I'm not sure. And we know people who are in power now, like Trump, you know, have dangerous fantasies of nuclear war, which might be self-proselytizing. I wanted to get back to this idea, though, that of the Enlightenment, because there's alternative explanations of how the Enlightenment formed. You know, there's a thesis that it actually happened because of first contact with the indigenous of the Americas, who had these ideas of egalitarianism and equality that were really influential, but that's been marginalized, you know, for hegemonic reasons. And yet it may be the way that we combat this idea, that we look at like different understandings of time that are more circular or less teleological. And I guess my question to you is, and also thank you for showing the Documenta, because I don't know much about Documenta, but I know that's the only interesting one that, as far as I'm aware.
Definitely the most interesting one.
Yeah, yeah. So my question is, you know, how do we mobilize different conceptions of time to combat these really dangerous teleological ideas.
I don't understand the question. What's the question?
The question is, how do we get out of Eurocentrism?
Oh, okay. I mean, I think, can I?
Yeah.
Because the idea that Europeans can somehow claim ownership of momentous events such as Enlightenment or Renaissance are totally bonkers. Of course not. I mean, you mentioned Graeber and Wengrow's book, right? We're saying, okay, it was basically, a colonial import from North America, right? The ideas of Enlightenment, because at the time, ideas of freedom and so on, didn't really exist to that extent in Europe, which is great. The same goes for the Renaissance, I mean, there were no books of, classical Greek or, Roman thinking in Europe during basically the Renaissance would have been unthinkable without the golden age of Islam. So what this means is that while in certain regions in Europe these things happened, they happened because there were these ideas travel around, and then there is a certain kind of historical condition of possibility, and they can emerge. And accidentally that was Europe, but that doesn't mean that there's anything, that the Europeans can claim these things that we're superior, blah blah blah. They were doing this, but that's nonsense. But that also means that it puts the kind of accusation of Eurocentrism when you talk about these things also, on the kind of shaky grounds. So yeah, as Achille Mbembe, that quote goes, we have to come together and do that kind of very difficult. It's not going to be holding hands and singing songs or, breathing. No, it's going to be really, really conflictual work. And we have to learn to bear levels of, kind of, intellectual jarring, but not just intellectual, but, as you say, understandings of time, understanding of what it means to be together in between, not in between, in common, and so on and so on. Yeah, yeah, and in a time of great polarization, this is hard to see, but it has to remain the horizon, I think, and that's what you're saying, and I totally agree.
There's a great book by Kim Stanley Robinson called Days of Rice and Salt, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
And he imagines Europe got wiped out in the Black Death. So Europe finishes in 1350. So, and he gives basically an alternative account of modernity. So the scientific revolution happens in Samarkand. It's the nuns in where are they? Somewhere in Beirut, somewhere in the Middle East invent feminism, and the Islamic nuns invent feminism, and the North American Indians invent a democratic, free, federal society. Oh, so there are. It's a good way of saying there are whatever the European Renaissance Enlightenment was, it was already made by and in dialogue with these other things before. Of course, it went out and conquered them. So that it's important to remember that they're part of that dialogue. But I would end by that question by I did a lot of work on China, and from about 1880, starting in Japan, but going right across Asia, they call it the awakening of Asia. A whole series of encounters took place, mainly because the Europeans were sailing up their rivers with gunboats, whether it's Japan or India or the Middle East, Turkey. A whole series of encounters took place whereby many of those European ideas, the ideas of enlightenment, which were being proclaimed, usually at the end of a gun, were adopted by the new generations in those countries and turned against the Europeans. And so you get and it was experienced as a liberation. So the overcoming of Confucianism, a certain kind of feudal hierarchy in China was experienced as a liberation. And of course, yes, we want to liberate ourselves from the past, first move. Second move, we also want to liberate ourselves from you. And that's what the Europeans did like. So there's a process of dialogue going on that I think is not captured by just saying Eurocentrism. It's Eurocentrism, Europe at that particular time, through a whole combination of things, from violence to economic power set bombs going, that I think that much of that was absolutely seized upon by those who wanted some of that, but not under your tutelage. Thank you very much. And I think we've got to hold on to that kind of that process. Maybe one, just the last one.
I didn't actually have a question, and I know I'm not the lecturer, but I did want to just add that I think it's worth saying, when you think about Eurocentrism, I mean, I kind of hear like white supremacy, colonialism, and to me, when you invest in the liberation of Indigenous peoples, you will get, I don't know, the opposite of Eurocentralism. You know, you're balancing things out. Maybe that wisdom will get shared with us if we help it survive in the first place. And I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Justice, and thanks you guys. I went and took a piss at one point, so maybe you already saw, you talked about it with Nick Land coming up and accelerationism, and then the idea, and we're talking about time there, and I think it's maybe a really important point to maybe try and dig down into is maybe this because the left and right are sort of bonded in acceleration in their idea of time, and maybe we want to accelerate towards ruins because then that would satisfy this middle class Western delusion of being able to reinvent ourselves, and then but somehow also the right is wanting to accelerate, but through an image of the past. But then like rate and acceleration. Well, hold on. Just trying to piece these thoughts together. Like the project of colonization has been the accelerating capacity to liberate energy, right? You know, liberate minerals, liberate plant matter. And so time, yeah, I feel like we maybe missed out on the question before about trying to dig down into time some way. And is it okay to slow down? That's what I would like to know. But I've got all these assignments I've got to do as well, so.
Yes, it is okay.
No, it's not.
Well, it's got a specific meaning, I think. But no, I think, I mean, the ideas of time, I think the idea of a teleology, the idea of a linear line of history to some end called progress, that is an invention, well, it's certainly an invention of Europe, but that's not the only thing that was going on at that time. There are other strands in there that's always critiqued right from the beginning. And the idea of radical enlightenment actually goes back to those people who were against Descartes, the people who were against Hobbes, who were against those people who, the scientific method, I think, therefore I am. There's been a countervailing tendency, a lot of it coming out in German philosophy and later on and other things. So I think there are multiple strands within that. And we need to retrieve some of that. I think we just because of what's happened, what was generated out of Europe, and for all those reasons, we'll go up and dig your whatever we want from you, and subject you to domination. Because that's happened, it sets something off that it's very difficult to, that's where we are, and it's how we deal with that and how we respond to that. And that question is we would call it a planetary question now, and certainly not led out of Europe or out of European ideals in that way. We're not saying that at all. I don't think.
Depends on what you mean by slowing down, right? I mean, I don't think urban gardening is going to cut it, right?
And that compost, like really big composts, massive composts.
Okay, fine, massive compost. No, I mean, but scale. I mean, but these kind of regenerative design. I mean, many of them, you know, they don't. I mean, you know, many of them are my colleagues, you know, and we got these kind of big Dutch Design Week, you know, where everyone. Anyway, so you know, they tell you the story. Oh, we have to save the world, and then they come with, and yeah, and there's this mycelium napkin that is going to, you know, and then you know, and that's what Liam Young says with this provocation is that. Yeah, I mean, let's do all this, but this is not going to be enough. So what he says is that we have the technological infrastructure. The only thing we have to do is to kind of turn it around from a carbon producing to a carbon absorbing structure, and then we're fine. I mean, I don't think that's right, but at least, you know, yeah, you know, scale is very important when we kind of think of that. And yeah, okay, well, yeah, that was it.
I've still got the microphone here, though.
I heard you say last question. Almost 7:15 on the dot. I just want to basically formally close off this part of it and move on. I wasn't expecting such a lively dialogue. That wasn't necessarily what I was thinking tonight was going to be, but it was absolutely brilliant to see. No ideas happen in a vacuum. They are the product of the things we've read, the conversations we've had, and it's nice to see an academic dialogue in action. And I really look forward to seeing these ideas develop. And I invite everybody to join in thanking both Justin and Seb for that dialogue and to continue it over drinks.